Thank you, Luca, for joining us. When we found this about Distinkt, it was super interesting for me to see innovation going on in ink for packaging, and that wasn't related to basically the source of ink, like basically making inks more sustainable and those, but was more on the technology side of ink, like how ink can contribute into supply chain and tracking. And basically I think the one of the positioning that Distinct is going on is reducing fraud and scams around packaging. If I'm right, if I got that right from the website. So Luca, basically in one or two lines, how will you describe the work of Distinct?
Shabazz, thanks for having me. First of all, it's a great observation because I think that's really the key here is we're innovating in a place that hasn't been innovated in for a couple of decades, right? Exactly what you say. People have been trying new materials to create different effects, but never has anyone been able to manipulate core essence of the ink to create what is really a live change. And so what we're doing at Distinkt is we're creating unique inks to print identifiers on physical products that cannot be faked. Now we can print those in the form of QR codes. We can also print them in the form of logos or any special pattern. Now, the fundamentals of our technology are specialized nanotechnology, which changes color under fluorescence. And this ability to use multiple invisible light streams, we use ultraviolet and near infrared light to create a fluorescent color change, where you actually see under fluorescence an ink change from red to yellow or blue to green. And we can create all these rich color patterns with that ink. And that allows us to create these unique markings for anti-counterfeiting solutions. Exactly what you said, it's actually playing with the fundamental chemistry at a nano and even a quantum scale, which allows us to do this, which wasn't possible, 5 or 10 years ago. So it's very exciting technology, and it's a platform that we're going to keep developing moving forward.
Yeah, and it sounded super interesting because when I was reading on the website, I saw that video where you mentioned this ink can be used on banknotes, on certificates, on collectibles. So I'm very curious about that as well. So basically, Luca, where do you see is the need present in the market of a solution like this? Like which area is the most pressing hazard?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, unfortunately, counterfeiting is blossoming everywhere right now. It's really become a scourge. It's a $1.7 trillion global problem, and it's really branching out into all different product categories. Probably the most recognized need that's been around the longest is high value brands, like luxury goods and maybe brands that are more common, Nike, Patagonia, things that are common but high value, but also medicines and cosmetics. And I think when you ask about where I think the need is the largest, I think definitely cosmetics and pharmaceutical drugs create the most imminent threat to human health, right? So the fact that these products that touch our skin or go in our body can be fake, or increasingly fake, is a growing social crisis. But perhaps the markets that are most searching already for solutions are more apparel industries or even consumer products. I would say, wine is having a huge problem. Beer and alcohol are having real problems with fake goods. So we see it everywhere, but I think certain markets have already adopted solutions where it can be a little quicker for us to take advantage of entering. But I think this is going to be something we're going to be talking about for decades into the future.
That's nice. And it's pharmaceutical is not something that I was thinking about, but now that you say it, it sounds super important, very obvious as well. Because the entire pharma industry, they work on the uniqueness of their products and with authenticity of their products. And pharmaceutical companies invest a lot into protecting their intellectual property of their products. And of course, I think this counterfeiting problem is one of the biggest challenges for them. And I'm very happy to hear that Distinct has already thought about those things. So how does it work basically? So I understand that Distinct has created an ink that can change its color under different light conditions, which allows brands to basically embed few codes or a uniqueness into their product that can help them basically authenticate. So, but I'd like to hear more of your perspective on this.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. So basically, we print the ink onto any material. We can print it directly onto garments. We can print it onto glass. We can print it onto plastic. We can put it into tags or labels that are already on products. We can incorporate them into QR codes that are already on packages, right? So the ink is really flexible, and anywhere that you're already printing something, you can add our ink to that solution basically. So once we're on the product, and that's the easy part. Once we're on the product, then there's two things. Number one is with the human eye, you can see the effect change with different light sources. You need ultraviolet near infrared light. You can create this beautiful, very sort of nice fluorescent color change that the human eye can see and validate. So if you're talking about money or passports, at border control, they can shine a flashlight on your passport, which they do today with a UV light. But if we add a near infrared light to that, you can see these really rich color changes, which will authenticate. For more digital solutions, what we've created is an app which can actually detect our inks in a digital environment. So we've created an app which is API integrated to our clients, and that app can actually decode our ink and confirm and authenticate that it is our ink on that product. And what is actually in that app is a very intelligent algorithm which is detecting our color change. So it's our initial color mission, our secondary color mission, but also it can watch this color transfer, which changes from red to yellow, then back to red, and it sort of creates this unique fingerprint for the ink, and the app can authenticate that unique fingerprint. So we're one of the only companies that can actually authenticate that a physical product with our ink on it is authentic. And the fact that we are an ink makes it very easy to put onto products. The relevance for this means that we can create a secure loop for our customers. We can ensure that wherever they're checking, if it's in the supply chain or at the final point of sale, that's the product that was created. And since we can guarantee that it is real, that allows us then to do all kinds of things with that QR code or with that product. We can connect it to blockchain solutions. If they're wanting to do track and trace, our QR codes can connect to track and trace software. So by creating these really intelligent QR codes, actually, it allows us to do multiple things in a digital environment with our solution.
That sounds very brilliant, specifically the application part. One question that popped up in my mind while thinking about it: consumers usually, infrared lights ultraviolet lights and flashlights are easy to find. And I think this authentication, where do you think it will happen most? On the storefront side of things, I'm talking about luxury brands. In case if a consumer wants to verify the authenticity right then and there, then maybe the vendor can showcase them that, okay, this is why it is authentic, because you see this logo, this is how the behavior of the ink. Or can it happen, how easy it is for basically brands to implement this authenticity and check on their end, obviously making it easy for consumers to also verify.
Oh, that's a great question. And that's something, to be honest with you, that is a continuing area of research for us. But the initial application that we have, because of exactly what you say, this idea that you have access to ultraviolet or near infrared light may not be for every consumer, right? We don't have near infrared light at home, and most of us don't even have ultraviolet light at home. So the initial application is for B2B purposes, where the brand can actually authenticate its value chain downstream. So you can track this product through its distributors, through its point of sale channels, and that way they can have a better control over who's selling their product, so they can get an authenticated scan back to them to say, okay, just to ensure that everything is going according to plan. If they start seeing that there's sales happening or reported sales happening without those confirmed scans, then they know there's a problem in their supply chain. So that's kind of the initial application is for B2B, but we're already looking at how do we create something that's responsive just to white light through the mobile phone? And we have some initial tests that we need to improve upon sort of the field of view and increasing and improving the visual response. But eventually we'll get to that point where the customer themselves will be able to authenticate it in an app with just the flashlight on your mobile phone. It takes a little bit of time to develop that, but it's something that we're quite confident we'll get.
Okay, yes, and it makes sense. Of course, everybody has a smartphone, so if not an infrared flashlight, at least smartphone can work. Luca, also, this is a very new solution, and of course, I'm pretty sure you might have also faced these kind of challenges of that. Basically, there are other technologies available in the market that are kind of solving similar things. For example, blockchain became a very hyped technology that can help prevention of counterfeiting across the value chain, because you can basically simply upload the information on blockchain as soon as a product checks up on any kind of checkpoint. Apart from that, there are some government regulations, there are point-to-point tracking. So how does does basically, what kind of competitive advantage do you see over blockchain or over other technologies in your tech?
No, actually, blockchain for us is the perfect complement. The challenge that blockchain has is it can't authenticate any physical product. You can describe the product in a digital world, but you can't actually verify that that product is what it is supposed to be. And so we're a great complement. And our first trials was with the Gaudi Foundation, which was authenticating limited release of NFTs. And they had printed these really attractive 3D dolls under the inspiration of Gaudi. And we create that unique physical marking that authenticates the physical product and then it bridges it to blockchain. And so, in fact, by creating truly encrypted QR codes, we actually can provide that digital physical, like people call the phygital link of security, where with blockchain, we provide kind of the perfect security solution. So we don't see blockchain at all as a competition. It's very much complementary to what we're doing. And we're providing kind of the missing piece to that blockchain solution. And then with respect to the field of authentication is a very busy field. There's lots of things going on in authentication. In the packaging industry, there's dozens of solutions. They tend to be aggregating around mass encoding solutions, which is QR codes, UPC codes. And this is where government regulators are actually getting involved in requiring that products have unique identifiers that you can actually track the life of the product. And this regulation is increasingly coming into play. The solutions that are out there today play with readily available materials that unfortunately get copied pretty quickly. So what we're already seeing, like with tags, with QR codes, with barcodes, they get manipulated. You can modify the boxes in the QR code to send you to a fake website. Counterfeiters are setting up fake websites that look like the real thing. It's very hard for a customer to know actually if their security solutions are working or not. We solve that problem because only our scanner is going to be able to detect our ink. This is not an open source technology. We create a closed security loop. The ink is a lock and the digital reader is the key. And so unless you have both, you can't possibly authenticate the product. So, and the fact of the matter is we can manipulate, modify the ink in different ways to create lots of different visual effects. We can also, so that creates a really complex matrix of possible outcomes that counterfeiters will not be able to replicate. And then you can also use the digital element as a control mechanism of who's downloading the app, when are they using it, how are they using it, what are they verifying. So these two things together create millions of possible outcomes that we can control, monitor, and authenticate at the end of the day. So we have a much more robust solution, which I would say is completely auditable. We can guarantee that the products that we touch are what they say they are. So, I think by integrating it into an ink, instead of creating these more complex tags and codes, actually we're using a very, very simple solution that can be on every single product very easily and very quickly. And then the people downstream, the users, can decide how they want to use it once it's on the product. So, we're encouraging customers to put it on the product now and then evolve the use cases, over time, because there's going to be a lot of things that are going to be possible once our ink is on the product.
These technologies, more of like the level at which Distinkt is working, it's actually empowering these technologies to make them even more robust because they're mostly working digitally. And I agree about RFID tags as well. What you shared, that these can be tempered with, modified easily, and because they're highly technology dependent solutions, right?
Right.
Okay. So Luca, now the question comes up is in my mind, of course, for example, inks, there are other photosensitive inks as well. For example, there are ongoing products which changes color in sunlight, or they do something happens in different light conditions. So, but those inks, they degrade over time, and eventually these products, they become normal products. Earlier, a dress that changes colors in sunlight, it will become a single color dress, or somewhere in between a white and yellow shade. How are you guys solving that problem, or is that something that's already taken care of?
Shabazz, I'm impressed with your knowledge of the topic. Yeah, so that's exactly right. And the big challenge is, how do you create strong visual effect? And that's what fluorescence allows us, right, to create these really brilliant colors. So that is in our favor. But how do you create a strong visual effect which is both robust in use cases? If you're printing on money, which is moving around, or if you're printing on shirts, which is rubbing up against your skin and getting washed every week, then that creates the sort of difficult environments. And then how do you ensure that that's going to last a long time, depending on the use case? If you're printing on an alcohol bottle that's if it's beer, it's going to be consumed within the month. If it's a bottle of rare wine, it might not be consumed for 30 years. So you really have to think about really different use cases. And so we create applications for each one of those use cases. And the way we create the color emission actually varies depending on the use case. So we might use a common off-the-shelf dye for something that is a consumable, right? Because it only needs to last a year. If it needs to last 3 to 10 years, we might need to incorporate something. Now with quantum dots out in the world, there's a lot of new vibrant colors. We try to, we completely avoid any rare earth applications, but there are quantum dots that can be created that don't use those. And then we have some in-house recipes that we create our own color combinations, which are very color emissive and have long duration. So actually, because we're kind of a live chemical recipe, we're constantly modifying it to fit the use case. And we do have solutions that are either short-term, medium-term, or long-term, depending on what customers need. And, the longer it has to last, the more expensive it is to make and the more it costs.
Okay, understood. So basically, if I visualize, basically when you were saying it, so your team is sitting with these magic potions of inks, different inks, and you basically mix them together depending on who wants what kind of elixir for their product.
Right.
So quantity differs, but you're able to make it very long lasting as well as short lasting, and depending on the life cycle or shelf life of the product that you are basically making for.
Right, and each customer has its own use case. Each customer wants its own effect. A lot of customers want exclusivity on a certain effect or a certain color combination, and we can provide that for them because we have a pretty broad portfolio of colors that we can use. It's not infinite, right? You're not yet, unfortunately, at a point where we can create every single color combination. But it's growing really rapidly because this is all kind of new science. And what we tell our customers, we have one patent. We're going to be filing 2 more this year. And this is going to be a normal process for us of just continuously producing IP because this concept is still brand new and no one has ever done anything like this before.
And I'm glad to hear those words about patents and IP because that was another curiosity of mine that I wanted to ask later. But I'll ask that question later because I currently have a lot of other things to cover. I'm finding this very curious, and you are a very kind person because I figured this much out based on how you have done the clarity that you carry about your product and how it applies and it changes over the time. So Luca, I'd like to ask about, again, it's about the shelf life of your product only. So what's the maximum range? You mentioned whiskeys and wine. So sometimes wines are kept for hundreds of years.
Right.
So is Distinkt able to produce something that can, like an ink that can maintain this authenticity for hundreds of years?
We've never tested hundreds of years. Hundreds of years is hard to test.
Yeah.
We know we're really confident in a 10-year window. Like today, we've tested in such a way, we were really focused on products about 10-year windows, apparel, consumer goods as first markets. For things that are collectibles, works of art, for maybe bottles of wine that are held for a long time, I wouldn't yet sell this for 100-year applications. But I also think that no solution is ever going to last 100 years. There's never been a technology solution that's ever lasted 100 years. So I think looking for something that would last 100 years is really not a problem we need to solve, if I'm being honest. Like, I think if you are a rare collectible, you need to solve the problem, 10, 20, 30 years at a time, because there's always going to be new technology. There's always going to be new solutions. There's always going to be new ways of protecting precious goods that you're going to need to stay on top of. So, we don't think of the 100-year window as something we probably need to reach. I think in 100 years, God only knows, our inks by then will be everywhere and they'll be really common, and who knows, what counterfeiters will be able to do with them. It's really advanced science today, but in 100 years, it'll be really pretty common knowledge, I would expect. I don't worry about 100 years. I aim for the 10 to 25 year window where we do feel like that's a window where we need to protect our customers. And we're really strong in 10 and we're working our way towards 25-year protection.
Understood. And it makes perfect sense. And of course, I think once you're way past 50 years or 100 years, it's not a job of technology. It's more of you step into more forensic science level of analysis to authenticate the product. And I think that is what our current scientists do when they want to authenticate the like artifacts that are found, archaeologists and also they you need to have a lot of domain knowledge to build something that can be authenticated past beyond 50 years or 100 years.
Right.
So it makes perfect sense.
Well, and I think that in those cases, they'll be adding new things every 5 or 10 years, right? So, there's always going to be, if I own, a Picasso, I'm going to always want to make sure I've got the best technology protecting it. So, every few years, you're going to look into the market and you're going to add something new. And
Hmm.
so, in that space, number one, there's very few products that need that kind of protection. And secondly is, we see ourselves, because we're at ink, as really a mass consumer product benefit, right? I mean, I think there's lots of things when you're marking them one by one over that kind of period of time, and they're worth billions of, millions or billions of dollars. It's a very different value proposition, and we could work there, but we believe that because we can print on QR codes, we can be a mass adoption for products, and that's where we want to benefit society in a bigger way.
Understood. I think then it's also a question about how easy it is. I know you have maybe boiled everything down in just.
So there's basically 3 steps. The first is we just need to integrate our pigments into the inks that they use for their products currently. So if they're printing direct to garment, if they're printing on labels, on tags, whatever they're using today, we can integrate our pigments into those printed solutions. So we can get it onto the product. That's step one. That's a fairly easy step for most customers. Step two is identifying who's going to be authenticating in the process and creating the kind of QR code which would most benefit the company. So if you only want to check at final point of sale, that's one thing. But if you want to check at different steps in the process and you want, maybe the wholesalers authenticating, and we can create in one QR code, they can see something different depending on how we roll out the software. So we can create various visual responses of a QR code that can be seen by different people at different phases. So step two is kind of designing the infrastructure that you want to be, where you want to be able to use this, and embedding that in the design of the QR code. So how many inks do we need to use? What are they going to do? And why? So that's step two. And then step three is you need people that have the light source to activate the ink. So either UV light, high power UV light, or near infrared. We could modify that depending on the use case. And they need the software to authenticate. So you need to be able to activate and read the ink. So those are the 3 elements that all need to kind of align. Like I said, I think the ink one is the least difficult. The middle step is the most important, is, okay, why do you want to use this? Where do you feel like counterfeit goods are breaking into your value chain, and how can we best embed this in your company to help identify and eliminate that? And then step 3 is just how do we roll this out, which is a fairly straightforward process as well.
Okay, understood. And which industry have you seen most success in at the moment? Like, which industry has
Clearly
been able to.
apparel is the one that everyone is talking about right now. It's the one that has the most at stake in terms of volume right now, and I think it's really the one that feels the most under threat. I think increase. So I would say that's number one. Number two is clearly pharmaceutical. I put pharmaceutical and cosmetic together. I think anything that kind of touches your body on the outside or the inside is really potentially problematic, and I think those are both increasing the fastest. Probably, I think the awareness is really there that. We've seen cases where cancer drugs are fake. People are buying fake cancer treatment drugs in hospitals, right? So things like that are kind of terrifying cases. And when you read about those, that creates the most fear. And so there's quickly growing sort of adoption in those markets. So I think those are the ones that are the most astutely kind of tuned into it. And then, there's luxury goods, general wines, purses, bags. It's probably the one maybe we read about the most, maybe not the most volume, but high value. So, sort of all markets are kind of moving similarly aggressively, but I think just apparel in general is the one that's the most tuned in and where we're seeing the most early interest.
Understandable. And of course, luxury brands, they want to maintain their authenticity, and basically that authenticity is the major selling price for these brands.
Mm-hmm.
For example, authenticity is not the selling price for pharma industry in general. It's basically they're solving a problem, and usually a lot of customers, they really are not educated enough to authenticate the medicine. But in case of apparels, everybody wants a branded t-shirt.
Right.
Or, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. All of the value of the product in apparel is in the brand and the trust, right? That's all the value is there, all of it. And so if you don't trust that it's original, then it doesn't have the value that it claims to have. As to where medicine has a different value, right? It's healing you, so it's a different thing. But you could argue that with consumables and apparel, all the values in brand, and I think the brands need to be able to convince their customers that what they're selling them is real. And it's not just about luxury, though. It's I would say high value brands, so Nike, Apple, things that are maybe much more highly consumed also suffer. So it's kind of anything from mid market and above. We talk a lot about luxury, but that's actually not the customers I think that are the most to gain here. I think the people who have the most to gain are high value mid market brands. Mid market being not luxury. Nike, Apple. We're seeing these massive counterfeiting going on right now because the counterfeiters have figured out that if they attack high value markets, they're going to get or high volume markets rather. They're going to make more money, and that's where they're focusing their attention now. So they're moving away from the luxury, or I would say they're doing both now. They're doing luxury and they're attacking the high volume brands.
The method differentiate.
Right.
Method is different for each, but yeah, they're targeting both the market, one way or the other. So now I'd like to dive deeper into the challenges Distinkt or basically you as a CEO has faced on making this product or making the technology work. So what kind of innovation challenges has you faced or Distinkt has faced to make this work because as I mentioned, there are a lot of photosensitive inks out there. You already had a somewhat figured out market, but of course this counterfeiting solution is very unique, using this photo effect to prevent counterfeit. So what kind of challenges did your team face making this ink possible?
Well, you said that like it was a past tense. We are very much always facing challenges. There's really two things. Number one, our technology in high security applications. So when we say high security, primarily we're talking about money and passports. In high security, everyone knows this field well of luminescent responsive ink. So ultraviolet, near infrared responsive inks is an old technology. So when they see what we're able to do, they're the ones who most appreciate how we do it because they've tried and failed to be able to change color under fluorescence. So they understand the challenge behind it and they appreciate the value of what we've created. So for those markets, it's easy to explain to them why we have an added value above existing technology. But now we're taking that technology into consumer industries where ultraviolet responsive inks exist, but there's less of a technical understanding and less in-depth appreciation for something that is truly replicable, right? Truly creating something that cannot be copied. They have a harder time assessing. They don't have the amount of technology experts in their companies, in their R&D departments, because this is not their core technology. It is core to high security applications. It's not core to consumer goods. So convincing people why we are truly unique and why changing color under fluorescence is really important for authentication is harder to do because they see all kinds of solutions that seem really cool and interesting to them. And they don't necessarily understand easily how easy it is to copy some of these outputs. And RFID tags is a good example, right? So only certain companies really understand the threat that a normal QR code can have or a normal RFID tag and how easy those things are to copy. So to really appreciate what we're doing, the uniqueness of it, and why that really provides anti-counterfeiting, an authentication solution in an encrypted environment, it takes some level of knowledge and insight into the entire industry of anti-counterfeiting solutions. So yeah, we need to find educated customers, people who've been looking for solutions, who work with solutions. Those tend to be the ones who appreciate what we've created more. But if you're a newcomer to the authentication game, a lot of technologies can seem really useful to you until you really understand and you really see that, oh yeah, actually that's not as robust as I thought it was. And what we're providing is actually something that we can guarantee from day one is completely safe.
Education becomes very new technology, and so you need to find customers that are already aware about those issues and very eager to solve them as well, which makes perfect sense. And I think this is the challenge your team is facing into expansion and getting out there, right? So from technology perspective, if I recall, you mentioned that 10 year robustness of your product is something that you have already figured out, but in 25 years long lasting is something that you're working on. So that's, I think I can classify that as a technological challenge that your team is trying to solve. So is there any other kind of similar technological challenge that your team is trying to make or build?
I think for sure, what we would love for this to be an unlimited color palette, right? To be able to change from any color to any color. That would be the dream. We're not there. Like the technology of coloring and coloration is not there. But we're encouraged when we look at sort of those LED lighting for screens, TVs. This was an industry that suffered through sort of similar process and a similar challenge. And we have great advisors who kind of know how that industry evolved. And I think that's something that will mature over the next decade or 2 decades as quantum dots emerge. There's other things that we're working on which are really promising, which offer a lot of options for us in the future. It's just going to be a continuous process of filling out that color palette until you can fill the entire rainbow and you can get it into normal printing cartridges, and pretty soon it'll be available to all of us and we won't even remember that it wasn't there, because the best way for us to take advantage of this at scale is to put it on every single QR code in the world, and then the customers can decide how they want to use it or not, right? It's not an expensive solution principle to embed. It's not a difficult technical challenge to get it into every QR code. That's actually the easy part. And then over time, as customers become more sophisticated on how they want to encrypt their products, actually the decoding part can be done separately. So we're quite encouraged that I think the challenges that we have around scaling are very solvable and exciting. So that's where we want to be. We want to be on every QR code, every UPC code on Earth, and we want all the customers to be able to read it. Not just the corporations, but consumers. We want consumers to feel safe and to know that what they're buying is real.
And you mentioned something. I understand it's very easy to implement for brands your product into their existing inks and existing value chain. But how, for example, I'm imagining, and again, please correct me if I'm right or wrong, a lot you might face this challenge with existing technologies because a lot of brands, they're okay using RFID tags or they're okay using plain QR codes that people can scan and verify from their websites. And so from that perspective, using RFIDs or QR codes may sound cheaper or easier to implement to some of your customers compared to implementing a new type of ink in their products. So again, I'm just guessing if that is an issue. So is this something that your team is also solving? So how are you basically making yourself cost competitive against existing technologies like again QR?
Yeah. I mean, so it really becomes down to a question of materially, it's not expensive. It's how you embed the software and the authentication downstream, which depending on the application case could be less expensive or more expensive, right? Our scientists built water-based solutions that are completely green from day one. So from the start, we did one thing very different. We never used rare earths, which a luminescent industry of inks is rare. So everything that we're using is completely organic carbon compounds. So if you were to do an chemical analysis of our ink, all you're going to get is carbon material, which is amazing. It's all made to be included into water-based inks. Now, the ink industry doesn't use a lot of water-based inks. There's a lot of oil-based inks and things, but which we can work with, but we were made to be water-based. So we are a completely green solution. So getting the ink into the product is not particularly expensive. Of course, so when you talk about QR codes, one thing is printing them, another thing is paying for the maintenance of the QR code. That's where the cost is. The cost is in actually keeping that QR code live in a software database and active so that it can be authenticated if an inquiry comes in, right? So that's the expensive part, is actually the software side of keeping all these QR codes available. So on the printed solution side, we're not anything extra. I mean, of course, when you adopt it initially, it's going to feel more expensive than what you're doing because we're an additive. But over time, it's going to dissolve into sort of the normal price of printing a QR code. I think that's an insignificant cost. The significant cost is how are you going to embed it and how often do you want to check it? And so a QR code in the market, could cost anything from 50 cents to $7 or $8 to maintain, depending on what you're going to use it for and how often you're going to want to query it. So really the software side is the I would say the unknown with the customer, right? Depending on how they want to build that out. It's going to be more or less expensive depending on what they want to do with it.
And it's always a question like how serious are they about maintaining authenticity?
How serious are they? How many times in the value chain are people going to check it? Is it one only? Is it once a month? Is it once only after a year? Is it only once after 10 years? There's infinite sort of variability depending on the customer.
Understood. This is a question which I like to hear from you personally. So basically, when you mentioned that expansion, convincing customer was one of the challenge, and of course, coming up with this solution that can long last up to 10 years, 25 years. You've already faced a lot of so many challenges. Even I think, from a CEO perspective, even hiring the right people, right talent is one of the challenges you face. So during the journey of building Distinct and taking it to a point where it is now, did you ever feel like maybe this is not going to work, or maybe I should give up or should work? And I know all of the CEOs face this kind of challenge, but I just want to hear your personal thoughts about it.
I mean, especially early on, right? You're always 6 months away from being bankrupt. I mean, it's just kind of a perpetual state of existence. You get money, you start to spend it as you get close to the end of your runway, then you start to try to save and extend runway while you're raising new money. It's a very delicate balance, and it's a very fragile existence. And we're still, fragile. I think all companies, all startups are fragile because you raise money to increase your burn rate. You increase your burn rate, which makes you more exposed to the next round. So, you're always trying to balance this in the best way possible. And there's been lots of times when we thought either the technology was going to fail and wasn't going to be able to hit certain parameters. The colors weren't going to be bright enough. They weren't going to last long enough. They weren't going to be able to be printed in inkjet. They weren't going to be able to be printed onto glass. Like, we've had all of these fears and doubts throughout the existence. And every time, we've just worked through them. It's just, work each problem one at a time and hire great people. And I would say the biggest thing we're proud of as a company, I would say myself, my co-founder, Alex Julia, is that we hire people that are on brand for us, that work with the corporate culture and have the right mix of collaboration and innovation. In humility, we're not a company of big egos, and it's not a place for it in the kinds of things that we're doing. And, one person could really destroy the entire culture of a company if you're not careful. So I think understanding that innovation is just what we do. It's the world we live in. You're always going to feel like any moment, you could fail. That's perfectly fine, right? You get used to that. There's a few nights I don't sleep, right? Because I'm worried about something, but inevitably we solve it, I should say. It doesn't solve itself. Usually we solve it. So, problems are something you get used to and you get really good at working through. But people is something that you control the most, right? You can control who you hire, who you keep. And that's the most important part. So I think neglecting to spend time on hiring is the number one mistake startups make when they're growing fast, right? I'm just growing fast, I need 10 people. Yes, but if you hire one that's a bad apple, it'll spoil the whole batch. So you need to be careful with hiring. Everything else, I think, solves itself, or you can solve.
This is like a great message, and if I have to summarize it, so basically hiring great people and carrying that never giving up attitude, and somewhat, I think, a stoic approach to things, that every problem is solvable. And I think if it is solvable, then you don't need to worry. If it is not solvable, then anyway you don't need to worry. So so I'd like to carry that message with me later as well.
I mean,
so
you worry, but you can't let it.
Yes, I think that's very. Not sure if you know about this, but I find I find similar traits in Stoicism as well, and that is also what Stoicism also says, that just don't let it derail you from what you want to do, right?
Right.
Just solve the challenges head on. And I've seen this a similar. I've talked to a lot of CEOs in our campaign related to Scouted by GreyB, and I've seen this common trait in them, and is that successful startups and successful CEOs, they carry this attitude with them that problems are going to be there, but you need to be systematic about things, hire great teams, always look out for solutions, and basically don't give up on finding the solution until you have it. So look, I think with that I'm at the end of my last question, and which is, you mentioned earlier that you, from protecting your intellectual property, you already have one patent. So basically, what are your thoughts about? I understand the whole USP and Distinct that's carrying is your technology and your focus on protecting it. So you mentioned two more patents are coming. Is there any other ways you're also protecting, or basically making sure Distinct stays distinct?
Sure. No, I mean, there's a lot of things that we do that are process oriented, that are, that will never be shared with anyone. And we kind of are I describe it like the Coca-Cola recipe, right? We keep the core recipe to ourselves. And
secret, kind of, right?
What is a concentrate? We manufacture ourselves. We don't outsource. We don't share details of kind of what's in the secret sauce or how it's and it's as much about how it's made as what's in it. So that, the comfort of that is that it gives us a lot of protection early on, and the fact that each ink is its own composition, and each composition behaves differently. And each time we're creating an effect, actually we have to optimize it ourselves. So you're not going to find counterfeiters who are able to do that, right? They would have to have a live nanotechnology lab trying to mirror every effect that we create, and that would just cost a fortune because they wouldn't have any direction any idea where we're going. So that process is actually more valuable to us than the patents. Patents in some way kind of make you show your cards, right? So there's a downside to that. It's like, oh, I have to tell you what I'm doing, so now you know. But in theory, I'm protected. But we're in counterfeiting where that protection isn't worth much. So it's worth much. It keeps our competitors away, but it doesn't actually make us more or less effective. So we have to be careful about what we share in patents, and we keep them pretty broad, and we keep a lot of stuff in-house. It's just trade secrets.
Understood. In Europe and in US as well, sustainability and of course the sourcing of inks specifically as well. So you mentioned that Distinkt uses only organic inks, and if we analyze the code, so it's always going to be organic. So basically, how is Distinkt aligned with regulations in Europe?
Well, I mean, in terms of the cleanliness of inks, we're 100% aligned. Everything that we do is green by nature. There are occasions when we're integrating with other ink solutions. So if we provide a pigment to as an additive to an ink, it might be that the customer has other products in there which are not as friendly, or we might use a polymer encapsulation which is formaldehyde based because it's more durable for certain applications. So there are things that we do to our product at the request of our customer which might be less green. But from our perspective, we've provided a platform which is completely green and can work as such. So the regulation, I guess, that I'm most concerned about or most interested in is all the consumer protectionism stuff coming out now. You have the right of repair, which has come out. Now they're talking about a European regulation on product birth certificates and being able to track the entire life. Like those things benefit us as a product, as a concept. We provide a secure platform to track and validate in an auditable way in a completely encrypted environment all of these steps. So we're tracking regulation on both sides, but on the material side we have zero concerns. That's something that researchers believed philosophically, and Alex and the team who built this technology originally believed philosophically this all had to be green from day one, and that's how we've built it. So we don't worry about that at all. But on the other regulation side, consumer protectionism is where we spend all of our time and energy from a commercial perspective, figuring out how to take advantage of that.
I really enjoyed our conversation.
Thanks, Shabazz. Great questions. I really had a good time. So thanks a lot.